If you can't hear me, move on up. We'll be in chapter 4, starting chapter 4, book of John. One good thing about it, I've been told I have a voice that can carry, so it maybe doesn't matter where you sit, but some of us older ones are getting hard to hear. Book of John, chapter 4. Substituting for Brother David again. Was John a favorite of Jesus? Yes. Pretty close, wasn't he? Brother Zach, you want to open the class with a prayer?
Sure. Heavenly Father, as we prepare to start this class, we pray that Brother Ed will have a recollection of what he has prepared and that we will take it and apply it to our lives to help us become the followers in your kingdom that you would want us to be. We pray that you will be with us as we go throughout this class and the service afterwards, and that it will be done in a way that is pleasing to you. We pray that you will be with us as we strive each day to be the Christians that you would want us to be. Be with the people that are sick and bring them back to their health, and be with the soldiers fighting in the wars and return them home to their loved ones as soon as possible. In your Son's holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. There's three main ideas that we can derive from chapter 4 if we can get through all the chapter, and I think maybe we might. If not, David would finish it up. But the three particular ideas that we'll go through, and two of them are pretty much the stories you've heard before, and the other one you probably know, we just didn't study it that way. So we're going to start off. Greg, are you able to read the first 6 verses of chapter 4 for us?
Yes. Therefore the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize, but his disciples. He left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. Did you say 6 verses? So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour.
Okay, the idea we can glean from here is maybe a reason why he departed the area where he was at. The first verse says something about the Pharisees. Two things about this idea about the Pharisees. One, this may be the first encounter that Jesus realizes that he's going to have confrontations with the Pharisees from here on out. It could be an undertone here. But it also could be the fact that Anybody remember what the argument was with John the Baptist's disciples and Jesus' disciples?
They heard that Jesus had made and baptized more disciples than John. That's what this says.
Okay, so there the reason is you go to verse 2 in there and the tail end of verse 1. So the disciples of John the Baptist was somewhat offended that Jesus was getting more disciples than what John the Baptist was. And John the Baptist was in a situation where he said, hey, it's time for Jesus to increase. I'm paraphrasing. It's time for Jesus to increase and myself to decrease, which is forcing the disciples of John the Baptist to do what? To move over to Jesus. Okay? However, because of everyone with the influence of John the Baptist, what was John the Baptist known for doing? Baptizing. So the idea is that here Jesus and his disciples are baptizing. So there's a confrontation between what baptism is going to count here. But the other note about that is, you remember let's see, I got it written down here. Let me tell you where it's at. Matthew 3 and 7 following. Matthew 3 and 7 following. It talks about John the Baptist baptizing. And who comes to the surrounding area where John the Baptist is baptizing? The Pharisees. The Pharisees are wanting to question what John the Baptist was doing. It's also, I shouldn't use the word assume, it's also understandable that maybe the Pharisees also came to be baptized and did become baptized at that time. So who were they baptized under? John the Baptist. Okay? So now Jesus' disciples are baptizing, so you can see the discrepancy that the Pharisees are having. So Jesus done the honorable thing. Let's move out away from him. Get away from that idea of worried about what the Pharisees are thinking, and we'll move to fresh territory. And that's exactly what those verses are about. Now, in verse 2 it says, although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were. I Googled it to make sure. I was pretty confident it was the case, but I didn't want to go through the entire Bible in 30 minutes to find out. Did Jesus actually baptize anybody? No. Who done the baptizing for him? The disciples. And through the disciples, when they baptized through the disciples, but who was actually baptizing? Jesus. So he never manually done it himself. The disciples did, but the disciples were descendants of Jesus' belongings. And they done it for him. So we've got that clear in those first verses. Then we go to verse 5 where it says he came to a city, Samaria. By the way, Samaria is a little town. Had to look this up too. It's a little town, Samaria, but it's also in the region of Samaria. Okay? Now what's significant about Samaria, as we're going to get into the next section, is that in Samaria that it had been taken over where the 10 tribes had moved from their kingship under the influence of the Assyrians. Now, I know that's a little history there. But the Assyrians had come, and now what made Samaria as the way it was, the Samaritans, was the fact that they were a mixed race. They were now a mixed race. Some of the Assyrians had breeded with the Jews that was in the area, and that's of the 10 tribes. Now, the reason why the 10 tribes separated was the fact that in Solomon, his son was Rehoboam. And the 10 tribes could not accept the kingship of Rehoboam. They become under the kingship of Jeroboam. Anybody remember what about Jeroboam? Was he a good king or a bad king? Bad. Right. So he was in charge of that. And part of the reason what Jeroboam did the influence was, okay, we're not going to do any more worshiping in Jerusalem like it's called for. We're going to worship in the places I pick. He thought it was being, like a convenience store? convenient for, let's worship here. We don't have to travel all the way to Jerusalem. Well, did that violate law? Yes, that violated what God commanded. When Solomon built the temple, God himself, through his prophets, said, this is my place. I will put my name on this place, and this is where people worship. Okay? So that's going on here too. So we're going to get a discrepancy between Samaria, the Samaritans, and the Jews. By the way, it was Judah and Benjamin that stayed, they were still under the law that they were supposed to be. And then you got to understand, did the tribe of Levi have any particular place, country, you remember? No. But they were designated spots in every one of the countrymen. So that's to be prevalent too, that the Levites were also a big part of them stayed. All right, so now we get into verses 7 through 14. Mickey, you got that, 7 through 14?
There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life.
Oh, a lot of meat here. So now we have the first situation on the travel. He's going to meet a woman of what nationality? Samaria. Okay? Do they get along? It's told us they don't get along. And I've already preluded that there was already confrontation between that particular two races. Now, what's interesting here, I got to add to that Samaria idea. Jesus traveled through this area of Samaria. If you really hated a Samaritan, you really had to cross the Jordan River to the east, travel south along the Jordan River till you got out of Samaria area, and come back in to the west over the Jordan River again. It's evident that Jesus didn't do that. He took on this idea, well, the shortest distance between two lines he was on, straight line. But no, I think knowing this confrontation, this was meant to be. He did this on purpose to go through there. Now, the thing about it is, was he by himself? He had his disciples with him, didn't he? They were still fresh trying to understand everything. Did they believe in Jesus? Absolutely. Or they wouldn't be following him. But there's still some wonderment about, what about this man? What is it he's doing all the time, as we will see? Because doesn't it say in one of the verses that he's left there at the well to sit, and where do the disciples go?
In the city to buy food.
To buy food. Well, I thought they weren't supposed to mix with Samaritans. No. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And that is, they did trade and they did buy with the Samaritans. Yes, Mick.
We live in the world, but we don't have to be of the world.
Good point. Good point. We trade and sell with non-Christians everywhere. So again, we're having the same idea that we're going to do what Jesus is doing here at the well, and that is hopefully influence someone's understanding of who Jesus is. Mickey again.
And hopefully, we can be a good example. Sometimes we may have to wait a while in line, and some people get upset, and be a good example.
I like that idea of being a good example, because in this, the modern last 5 years or 10 years, if we just pick the idea of driving our vehicles and we see somebody that has road rage against somebody else, but we turn right around 30 minutes later, what might we be doing? We might be instigating the idea of road rage. So, Mickey, that's a fine point. We are Jesus' disciples now. We are to be his examples now, as they were then, at all times. That is our particular job to do. We're to sway people to understand, to ask that question. Boy, you're a little different than me. I'd kind of like to know what makes you a little different. Is that not the case here? Is the woman different than Jesus? Does she recognize the difference? That brought up a good question. I wonder how she knew that he was a Jew. You ever wonder that? How he might have known that she was a Jew? Didn't the Samaritans and Jews pretty much look the same?
Was he wearing a prayer shawl or something?
Could be some significance as to why they would be signified to know the difference between two of them. If we take the parable about the traveler that got robbed, and the Good Samaritan was a winner of that over a Jewish priest and a disciple. It might be the same. They all three recognized who the person was. They were different. So there's got to be that. There's got to be that thing. And then we got to add the idea. I feel Jesus always had this persona that was different than anybody. I don't know why I feel that way. I just feel like he had some kind of persona that just attracted people to want to understand him. And personally, I like that belief. I want my Jesus to be kind of that special for me. So he's at the well, and the woman's there at the well. And what is she at the well for? To draw water. To draw water. Jesus is resting and waiting for his disciples to come back. Is this a significant place? Have we all heard in Scripture? It comes from Genesis 33, 18 through 20, about Jacob's well. Is Jacob one of the big ones? Yeah. We got a situation, and what's nice about this is in the Scriptures, there's almost a little argument between the woman and Jesus as to why either one of them can be at the well. And I think the connection is because it is Jacob. It is because Jacob. But remember, the Samaritan woman is a mixed breed. She's not of the purest sex that Jesus was or any of the Jews. But she still claimed the fact that Jacob, I think she said at one time in there, Jacob the father.
Our father Jacob.
Our father Jacob. And it's like he declares how they can pray and how they can worship, and it's all right. So that comes into significance. Okay. Before we get into the meat of what they're talking about, anybody got a comment or question so far? Yeah. Yeah, you got Samaritans against Jews, then you got Jacob's well that's in Bix, and they're both entitled. So we got confrontations. Then we got the confrontations that we're getting ready to talk about. What Jesus is wanting to do. I thought it was unique here. He immediately knew her. As we'll find out a little later. He immediately knew her. He says, give me a drink. Well, that sets up a big thing. What would you think if you're standing at a well and someone says, give me a drink? Would you not dip the bucket down in there and pull the bucket up and hand the drink of water to the other person that asked for it? Or if you're a little bit, 10 or 15 years later, you got a pump? You would make the pump. This is a cistern type thing, though, right? This is an actual well. The commentator says that the original well was about 100 feet deep. 100 feet deep. And the latest research... I didn't hear. Oh, yeah. And the thing about it is, the archaeologists, people that have been in the early 1800s, they actually went down into the well. And the stone is beautifully hewed, or hewn, E-C-W-E-N, hewn. And it's well taken. And at the time it was 100 feet, it had, like 25 feet of water in it. So that's pretty deep well to be going down there. And by the way, at 100 feet, that'd be pretty cold. The only reason why I know that is we have geothermal at our house, and they dug 150-foot shafts, 3 of them. And the reason why is to find the heat and the cold, to exchange the cold in there to make the heat come about. It's a pretty neat system. But yes, Deanne, it's beautifully done. It was deep, and it was cold there. So it was nice, fresh water there. Since then, it's actually dried up a few times. And it's been filled with stones because people love to hear that sound of something clashing at the bottom. I've done that when my grandmother had a farm in Xenia, Illinois. Well, the farm's still there. And there was a well there. It was probably on about 20 feet maybe. And it was pretty sound to hear that rock hit that water, or if there wasn't any water here at the side. So Jacob's well. So they both had ownership on that. But she says, give me a drink. And he says, you would have asked him for a drink of water. He would have given her what?
Living water.
Living water. She didn't quite understand. And I'm not sure we would have either. If we're standing by the well and we're wanting a drink of water, and someone says, well, I'll give you water. I'll give you living water. I'm sure there's misunderstanding that's going to occur. Okay? All right, so then in verse 13, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. Well, can the human body go without water? No. In fact, our body comprises about 85% water of everything it has. Is that right, Doc?
I'm not sure the exact number, but it's
quite a bit. Large supply of water. We had, by the way, at the picnic, we had watermelon. Watermelon's comprised of a lot of water. Boy, it was good. It was good. Whoever brought the watermelon was fantastic. I couldn't keep my hands off of it. So it's good. All right. Now, everyone who drinks this water will thirst again. Then 14. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give shall never thirst. And the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. Okay? So that's a comparison. The well was there for everyone's use. And hopefully it didn't go dry because it supplied everybody with water. And Jesus is saying, I can give you a well of water always, or for eternity. And of course, she falls into this thing of still thinking physical, still thinking, hey, I wouldn't have to come bail out water to put in the pot. I wouldn't even have to come to the well anymore if you could give me that living water. Did she still understand at that time? No. She still does not understand at that time. So then, in 15, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, so I will not be thirsty, nor come all the way here to draw. Now, Jesus understands she hasn't got it yet. So he has to take another tack. He has to go in from another door, open another door on her. Now we're going to review a little bit here. How did he take care of the disciple Nathanael? That was just a few chapters back. Remember how he took care of Nathanael? To convince Nathanael who he was? He had seen him under a tree, and he knew all about him. Had Jesus been there? No. And was Nathan aware that Jesus could not have seen him? Yes. Now, here's the tack here. Let's go with verses 16 through 26. 16 through 26. Gail?
Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worship on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming. He is called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I will speak to you. I who speak to you am he."
Okay. So lots. So the tack is, let's unfold her life in front of her, for her. And she had to be surprised at the facts that he knew. So here we have a person. He says, "Go bring your husband." Why did he say go bring your husband? Because he knew she didn't officially have a husband. But here's a compliment to the woman. Did the woman try to lie or beg or cover up? She admitted what he said was right. That's unique. Remember, we're talking about a Jew and a Samaritan. Confrontations that had caused a lot of fights back then, at all times. "Go call your husband and come here." And then he compliments her for being honest about it. And then because she knows this, because she saw in him knowing information that she thought he shouldn't know, she perceives him to be a prophet. And of course, what are prophets back then? They were people that could what? Tell of the future. They're people that could tell what was in a person's life, because Jesus gave them the information beforehand. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking, wasn't that who was the prophet that went to King David and told him about his situation? Nathan? Yes, Nathan. Was that a prophet? Absolutely. And the prophet was to uncover something in David's past. And then, of course, in this case, it's a woman's past. Then they get into a little mild argument. My version, verse 20, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people," now that's what my verse says, "you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." Well, we already talked about that. According to Solomon's time, Where was the worship supposed to be? In Jerusalem, in the temple. And of course, the Samaritans did not want to take that on. They wanted to worship where they wanted to worship. Now, what's unique about this is the next thing that Jesus says. Did you get what Jesus says? Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. Are we in Jerusalem today? Are we in Samaria today? Are we going to worship God the Father in this place? That's what he's saying. And why is it that we can worship here in this place? Because we believe in what? Spirit and in truth. We believe in spirit and in truth. Okay, let's talk about that idea, believe it, because in the verses we're going to cover, it's not going to give us hear, believe, repent, and baptize. Thank you. That's an important part of it. But what is understood when we hear the word believe or belief? That you've done or you're going to do all five. And Glenn likes 6. Continue to be a good servant after the situation that you become a Christian. Okay? So we're going to see that word believe several times. And I think we can understand that believe means that they become full-fledged disciples of who they were understanding. Now, whether they were baptized, I don't believe at that time, but we're not so remote that it couldn't have happened on the day of Pentecost, that they were disciples at that time and wanted to hear and went back and then they or they could have been baptized at this time. But we're going to talk about the Samaritans who believed here shortly. 22, interesting part. For salvation is from the Jews. Salvation is from the Jews. Is that not the line of Jesus? Has to come through the Jews? In fact, he comes through the tribe of Judah. Does it not? So the salvation is the Jews. Is the salvation in the Samaritans? No. It is not in the Samaritans. So that little thing there is separated. And that's rightfully so. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. That's what they've been taught. And then 23, but an hour is coming, the true worship will worship the Father in the Spirit and in the truth. Okay. And then he says, for such people the Father seeks. Is Jesus the Father in this case? Absolutely. Is he seeking to influence the Samaritan woman? Absolutely. He influences her so much that what happens next is also unique. Remember, she's been married 5 times, or 4 times, and living with one. So, I like 26, don't you? Jesus said to her, my verse says, I who speak to you am he. He's saying, I am. What do we know about I am? What did God tell Moses on the mountain?
Tell them I am. Sent me to you.
I am sent me. And it comes up in several books yet to be unfolded that Jesus says, I am. By the way, if I remember my grammar class, that's a conjugation of the present tense, I am, which means going on. Presently. Not past, but in the future too. God is I am. Jesus is I am. I am here now. I am here always. I am. Okay, we need any questions or comments? Yes.
My notes say that this is the only occasion before his trial in which Jesus specifically said that he was the Messiah. And he said it to a Samaritan woman who even the Samaritans probably rejected.
Right. Good point. Before his trial, because that's where the other place where he does say it, because I don't know if it's key. One of the people he's in confrontation asked him who he is, and he's yeah, it might have been Pilate, probably.
Just think about the significance that this had in that culture, that's who he told, knowing she would go tell, and it started a whole belief system there in Samaria, and it's so easy for us to, shun this kind of person as being useless and not worth talking to.
Yeah, that brings up the point again. Why did he go through Samaria instead of going around? He had a point to start breaking the races down, or to start putting them back together again. And was it just those two races? What's the example of the two races being put back together again? All men being put back together again. Thank you, Suzanne. All people. Yes.
Talking about, the Samaritans, she said they worship there, in Samaria. But if they had gone to Jerusalem, the Jews wouldn't want them there. They wouldn't want to be with the Jews.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because they knew they didn't deserve to be there, because you'd already chosen to go someplace else. But again, we go back to Suzanne's comment. Jesus purposely went to Samaria to start this, to already start work on that. The people who want to believe in Jesus can be anybody, because she believes. Now, what happens next? So let's go 27 to 30. Roger, you got that?
Sure.
27 to 30.
And at this point, his disciples came, and they marveled that he talked with a woman, yet, excuse me, yet no one, sorry, it's on my neighbor.
Okay.
Yet no one said, what do you seek, or why are you talking with him? And the woman then left the water pot and went on her way into the city, and said to the men, come and see a man who's told me all things I ever did. Could this be the Christ? Then they said, then they went out from the city and came upon him.
Okay, here's a woman of ill repute that comes back to the city. She leaves her water pot. What was she at the well for? Water. She took off and left the water. Okay? Now she goes to the city and talks to, well, evidently she knew where to go to talk to most people. And she tells them this story. And then she raises the question. Now, she didn't say that she believed that this was the Messiah. What'd she ask? Could this be? Or is this person the Messiah? That automatically maybe puts a question in your mind. Could it be? We've heard that we're waiting for one. And 30, they went out the city and were coming to him. Okay? So they wanted to be convinced. I don't think they left her with the idea, well, we're going to go prove you wrong. We're going to go show you. I think they went because she told an interesting story. And I think because of the way Jesus expressed his inner thoughts to her, made it even more convincing. And remember, we're not only talking about a man talking to a Samaritan, we're talking about a man talking to a woman for that era of time. Of course, I would think in a private setting that's probably happened a lot back then. I think it's a public setting where the woman walk behind me and don't bother type stuff. Crap. Okay. So, they go out. Now the disciples show up and they have this bewilderment. What's he doing? Talking to a woman? Talking to a what kind of woman?
Samaritan.
A Samaritan woman. I'm sure they were thinking, he's got to be loony. But he only proves that they're loony too most of the time. Just like we are. All right, so let's get 31 through 38. Zach, you got it? You want to read it?
Sure.
31 through 38.
Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. So the disciples said to one another, Has anyone brought him something to eat? Jesus said to them, My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, There are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you do not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor.
Okay. So they've brought what they bought at the store. They've brought food. And all of a sudden, he's not hungry. Sometimes it happens in your lives that when you're preoccupied with such a concentration on what you want to do, that you don't need food at that particular time. Or sometimes you're so amazed at what you're accomplishing, you don't think about food at the time. Jesus just accomplished a big deal for God. And they weren't there to see it. So they can only comprehend that they went to get food and he's hungry. And remember, when it opened, he set it at a rock near the well because he was tired. He needed rest. And theoretically, he asked for the drink of water to open up the conversation about living water, but he might have wanted a drink of water. He might have needed a drink of water. So he's there, and the disciples are not, they weren't there, so they didn't see it. So they're trying to blame themselves a little bit for not having the food there proper. But he burns them, doesn't he? What has Jesus been doing? He's just been reaping the harvest. It was one person. Well, actually, it was more than one person. It was several Samaritans. As we're going to, we probably won't have time today, David, to get into next week. Several Samaritans there. But he talks about how there are people out there that need to find Jesus, need to find me. You're my disciples. You should be doing what I just did constantly. In some ways, remember, take this to today, there are many times, I'm sitting in a pew over here, and Justin gives a lesson, and my toes start to burn a little. I've been given a little reality check. And I kind of look on our sermons, is that not kind of what they are supposed to do? They're supposed to make us feel good to come together as brothers and sisters and worship together, and we do, and pump each other up. But it's also to let us be aware that our jobs are out there to try to convince others to be disciples of Christ. We need to recognize when the doors are open, to step through it, to do it. I have so much trouble with that. Sometimes I want to smack myself after leaving a situation where I felt like, well, there was a door I should have stepped through and opened. And that's what Jesus is telling his disciples here, I think. Questions or comments on this? Well, just to give you a quick synopsis, because class is almost over. in the middle section, the woman believed, but guess who else believes? The Samaritans that went out to talk to Jesus. They even ask him to stay for a couple of days, and he does. And the disciples say, now this is Samaria. Stay over there. Okay, that's the middle section where something great happens. So the woman's convinced, and now the middle. And then the nobleman's son. The second miracle at Canaan. The second miracle at Canaan. So be sure to read that if you haven't read that, to go over that. It shows the power of God from a distance. That's what I like about it. It shows the power of God from a distance. Any questions or comments to close class before? Thank you for your comments. Thank you for listening. 15 minutes we go worship God.